Look who's back. And this time, the two of you are partners in the latest installment of the Pokémon saga. It's Pokémon Yellow, the special Pikachu edition for Game Boy Color, where it's you and Pikachu catching as many as you can together. Look for the Pokémon Yellow Bundle Pack. It includes a limited edition Pokémon Game Boy and Yellow Game Pack.
Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, we are going back to Pokémon Yellow. It's no secret that during the 90s, Pokémon was all the rave. The games, the toys, the cards, the anime, it was inescapable. So inescapable that if you went to Burger King and ordered a kid's meal, you'd get something like this gold-plated Charizard card that, listen to this. Yeah, like it's real, man. Like, could you imagine them actually giving something like this away again? Like, absolutely unbelievable. One of my favorite collectibles that I kept from when I was a kid. I love this thing. I'm gonna put it in like a shadow box one day or something. But Pokemon was so special to that 90s generation. Me being born in 95, my first game ever was Pokemon Blue. I remember it clear as yesterday, and then buying it again with Pokemon Yellow when they re-released it later. One of my holy grail collectibles is to get the Pokemon Yellow Game Boy Color complete in box. That thing's over $1,000 and it is absolutely beautiful. So I hope I can get my hands on that one day. Same with a lot of the old Pokemon games I grew up with. Them being complete in box nowadays is extremely expensive. That's because really during the pandemic, we saw a resurgence of adoration for Pokemon. And whether it was because Logan Paul was buying first edition booster boxes for Gen 1, or because we were all going through a tough time and seeking some level of comfort and nostalgia in simpler times, whatever it may be, Pokemon came back with a force, really at the start of 2020. And fun fact, I got so caught up in that craze that it got me back into collecting Pokemon cards. I grade them now, but also it led me down this thought path of, I kind of want to make another YouTube channel beyond Mr. Matty Plays. What could that be? And the first idea I had was called the Mat Pack, which was going to be a card pack opening channel because I collected Dragon Ball Super cards, I collected Pokemon cards, I was looking into Yu-Gi-Oh! I was like, oh, this would be kind of fun. And then I decided to go with retro games. Nonetheless, that kind of teases up perfectly for our first write-in. You can write in as well over on patreon.com/retrorevive, where it really fuels all of the content we do here. Seriously, we couldn't do it without you. Agent of Chaos 904 says, as a 2000s kid, I never experienced the old Pokemon games myself, with my first being Heart Gold. What sets 90s Pokemon games apart for you compared to the modern day Pokemon? There is a degree of a you had to be there factor. I think if you handed someone a Pokemon game nowadays in their young adulthood, they would play and go, this is one of the most simplest games I've played in my entire life. Why are you all obsessed about that? And many people my age have kind of grown into that mindset. And the main thing that keeps us there, especially for games like Pokemon Yellow, going back to them, is nostalgia. There is an undeniable comfort in Generation 1, in my opinion. The vibe, the towns, the simplism of the game. You know, you just think back to that phase of your life. Nothing mattered at all except collecting all 151 Pokemon. That was no exaggeration. You think of all of the memories connected to that, what you were doing when you had your Game Boy with you. Specifically for me, I remember there was a rule in my house, like, hey, no video games after dinner. I was like, okay, Mom. And so I would oblige, but once it was nighttime and I would go to bed, we'll put that in quotes, I would have the backlight attached to my Game Boy and I would play Pokemon Yellow or Blue until I was dead tired and then go to sleep. My mom's like, why are you so tired this morning? Did you get enough sleep? And I was like, yeah, I did. Right, as I was like grinding the Safari Zone. So Pokemon kind of represents not only the pinnacle portable games experience for me, it probably is what spurred a lot of my love for handhelds. We made a video on the PS Vita a few weeks ago. I talk about Game Boy Advance games frequently on the channel and PSP games. Like, I have a strong attachment to handheld games. And a lot of it's because as a kid who was always on the go, my brother played a lot of travel sports, so we really weren't home often. This was my way of staying connected to games. And so things like Pokemon really were like my lifeline for video game love. Now, as I mentioned, I eventually moved on from Pokemon after Gen 3 and got really into Mega Man Battle Network, one of my favorite gaming series ever. And while I don't have as strong of an adoration for Pokemon like I did when I was 5, I still love it in its own way nowadays because it's given me so much. More than anything, it's the emotion it engulfs me with. I know the question was, what makes the 90s Pokemon, Gen 1 Pokemon different from nowadays, but I think a lot of it really boils down to emotional ties. Now, I do fear sounding like an old man shouting at a cloud when I say this, but when I play something like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which we reviewed here on the channel, not only was it really broken, which just wasn't a problem back then, but also some of the Pokemon designs just don't really light my fire as much. It's like, I remember being able to track all of Gen 1, 2 eventually when I finally got back to it, Gen 3. These were some of the most important ones, right? I mean, granted, that was when I was most connected. I was collecting the cards, playing the games, watching the shows, getting all the toys. Like, there was a strong connection there. But as it blossomed to 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, now I'm like, how many are there, by the way? It's so much, and we're running out of ideas. So that to me is the problem I have with certain Pokemon that are entering the newer generations. I think of ones I really like, such as Corviknight, I believe the name is. Really cool looking Pokemon. There are still some absolute gems out there, but sometimes when I see like the legendaries with the wheels attached to them and they're kind of like four-legged monsters too, I'm like, we're just throwing stuff together and hoping something sticks. Whereas back then, Pokemon really had a purpose because there was way more room to work with these creature designs. The color usage is beautiful, and more than anything, what I miss is the usage of pixel art. I'm one of the boomers out there, I guess you could say, that really does believe Pokemon should have always stayed a pixel art series. I know maybe that wouldn't have led to the blossoming of Pokemon as a series, but it was already a dominant force in the early to mid 2000s and remained that way for a while. But I just don't connect as strongly with 3D driven Pokemon games like Scarlet and Violet, games like Sword and Shield. It's a little tougher for me. The only 3D Pokemon game I've connected deeply with beyond remakes of the originals are ones like Pokemon Sun and Moon, which really I felt reinvented the formula a bit with Island Trials. So that was a major difference for me. I know this is just a long stroll down memory lane before we talk about Pokemon Yellow in a deep, meaningful way, but I think that the childhood memories that define Pokemon is unique to each of us, and that's really what separates the bunch beyond real tangible things like art style, the simplism of the gameplay, the world, the exploration, and also seeing how it grew. In some ways, I know it was just like incremental, but this is what we all looked forward to as kids. The next Pokemon game, the next episode of the anime, the next movie. It was like a parental figure. It just guided us through life in many ways. But it also represents a time where the internet wasn't as prevalent, so word of mouth was really key for these games. I've talked about certain gaming myths like Super Smash Bros. And the way you can unlock Mewtwo in Smash 64 and how you'd have to like beat the whole game with one life, hardest difficulty, and that was a myth I fell for so long as a kid. We had an interesting write-in that led me down another path through memory lane that came from TyGorgon12, who says, what are some of the myths around Pokemon Yellow that you fell for? Rapid tapping A to increase catch chances, using strength on the truck by SS Ann lets you find Mew, and many more I can think of from bus rides to school. And I gotta think of the darkest one that always stuck with me. I think many of you know where I'm going with this. Yes, the Lavender Town myth, the one that was about, it's pretty morbid, about Japanese children who were apparently committing suicide because of the Lavender Town theme. There was something within the track that was said to be making them feel a sense of dread and leading to a spike in death with Japanese children who were playing Pokemon at the time. For me as a kid, one of the most memorable areas in Pokemon Yellow, Red, and Blue is Lavender Town, right? You spend so long with upbeat music going through all these routes. The worst you see is Team Rocket, like, oh, shucks, we couldn't get your Pokemon there. Oh, blast it, we're gonna run away now. It's just all good, chummy fun. And all of a sudden you find a spirit haunting a tower and realize Pokemon can die, and you learn the backstory of Cubone, who's one of my favorite Pokemon, and the reason he's wearing a skull on his head is it's his mother's. It's like, it's horrible. It's horrifying. And when you learn that truth, I remember as a kid being very sad. And then reading that, I was scared to go to Lavender Town because I was like, dodged a bullet. I'm not feeling that way. So like, I don't want to go back there. I bit into that so hard as a kid and eventually realized as I like heard the music, I was like, oh, I feel fine. So it's just a myth, I guess, or I'm immune to it. Who knows? But that was one I bit onto really hard. Another one was, you mentioned rapid tapping A to increase the catch chances. And for me, I remember as a kid, I was told it was holding B. That was what I did all the time. And so I bit into that completely, right? Because I was the kid who, I remember playing Mega Man X Command Mission with one of my best friends growing up, and I swear on my life, this is what we thought would help us do more damage. We would all flip off the screen at the same time fighting a boss, and we thought it did more damage because we were telling it to fuck itself. And we actually beat the boss, and we were so convinced like that was it. So there's also the innocence of the disconnect from the internet where you didn't know everything. There was just word of mouth for this incredibly popular thing. So you'd hear murmurs in the hallways, stories being told, and they were just being passed down through word of mouth. There was no real right or wrong record until now, where people were able to check, verify, post articles and be like, hey, the Lavender town myth is fake, or hey, holding a button or rapid tapping a button to increase your catch chances is fake. You didn't have that back then. So yeah, the myths also were a really big part of Pokemon Yellow and Red. It just, incredible times when I really think about it. So I know this has been a long trip down memory lane, but I really think that's the lifeblood of this channel. It's just sharing stories. I love reading your stories down below or what you share on the Patreon. I love sharing my own. And then we can talk about the game, of course, now. Does it hold up in 2024? That's what Stu Dog's asking, and so let's talk about that. We'll get into the base game of Pokemon Yellow, but what I will say is what got me into playing Pokemon Yellow this year is this YouTuber, Smith Plays Pokemon, made what they call the perfect version of Pokemon Yellow, and it's called Pokemon Yellow Legacy. Now, he has a whole video on his channel on how to get access to this version of Pokemon Yellow, so I'll leave his video linked in the description down below so he can walk you through it all in case you're interested in that. But what he did was, with a team, put over 700 hours of work into this game to make pretty much the definitive version of Pokemon Yellow without fully remaking it. So it goes down to artwork, back sprites, which for those who don't know what that means, it's the sprite closest to the camera in battle, have been completely redone. And there are some phenomenal examples like he used in his video, Charmeleon, and how great it looks now. So all 151 back sprites have been completely redone, which is a big deal. Not only that, but they've added things like being able to play as a girl, Green. They've upgraded the backpack. There are new trainers for you to fight at the end of the game once you beat the Elite Four. There are UI updates. For example, you'll see in combat here, there's an XP display bar. There's a Pokeball next to the Pokemon name showing if you've caught it. You can see level up and TM moves of any Pokemon via the Pokedex. There are running shoes in the game now. They've tripled the bag size. There's faster saving and healing, so you can kind of go wherever you want, whenever you want, a little bit quicker. There's also HMs that can be deleted at any point. They've even added a hard mode to this game. That's just skimming the surface. It's like a 40+ minute video that I'll also have linked in the description down below if you want the full breakdown of everything from status moves, getting into the nitty-gritty, quality of life. Like, there's so much here where it very much retains what Pokemon Yellow is. Like, if you haven't played it in years like I have, like, it's been a good 15 years for me, because the last time I played, well, it was really Pokemon Blue, was actually I brought my Game Boy to school in high school, and during study hall, I would always have my homework done, so I would just play Pokemon Blue. That was always my mindset, was like to create a reward system, like do your homework so that you could kind of just slack off in school. I don't know, that sounds a little backwards, but it helped me get through school, so whatever. Nonetheless, it's been that long, and I know there's just major differences between Pokemon Blue and Yellow, but that was my last Gen 1 experience of running through the whole game. So I say all that because a lot of these changes that are made felt so natural that it wasn't until after I played it for a few hours and then went back to the video, I went, wow, they added so much that felt very natural. I mean, even the redone back sprites look so good and natural with the game that you're not really going to notice immediately unless you look at it side by side because of how well they emulated the art style from the original. So just kudos to the team. It's really cool that a thing like this exists. I've never really gotten into Pokemon fan projects before, but this is my first time, and I thought this was just a really cool experience to see how they've brought elements from future Pokemon games into this one. There's still an old school element. For example, just one Pokemon getting XP. You know, there's a little bit of grinding. It's still actually a little bit tougher than I remember. I know that it's not a hard game. You know, you just grind, level up, you target the weaknesses, and that's it. But even sometimes, like, hitting enemies with super effective attacks didn't do as much damage, and they would have good counterattacks to me. So it was a little bit tougher than I remember, but in a good way. I thought it was really fun, more engaging than I expected. It's still your baton passing style gameplay, like my turn, your turn. So there's a little bit of that. So does it hold up in 2024? In a lot of ways, yes. It's still old school Pokemon. So you're still running through like singular colored areas, like, Cerulean City is going to be blue. It's going to be a complete flat blue. It's very simplistic. The story's not going to blow your mind. The gameplay is at its bare bones for Pokemon, which many people actually prefer. So there's a lot here to say, like, yes, it is still great in 2024, but I think part of it's because I'm listening to the music, I'm feeling the vibes again. I'm just enjoying going down memory lane. I'm thinking of, again, the last time I played it was in high school. And this has just been a really fun run for me. So for me, yeah, it holds up. But for you, I think your mileage may vary. We'll talk about just the base game experience in a moment here, but I want to go through what I'd call a semi-complete box experience. In all transparency, I do want to one day collect all of the Pokemon games complete in box. And I have a decent chunk of them, but ones on Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance are very expensive. The first one I really want to get my hands on is Pokemon Emerald. That's my personal favorite Pokemon game ever. And that's, last I checked, like $600, $700 for a decent looking copy. It's more for an actual clean copy of that game. Same kind of goes for Pokemon Yellow. One of my best friends who really helps a lot with supporting this channel, Soul, he actually has Pokemon Yellow. He got it for an amazing deal of like $200 pre-pandemic. And I was looking, thinking like, oh, I can maybe try to swing $200 for Yellow. It's more than double that now. It is expensive to get Pokemon Yellow. So I apologize, but I had to kind of make an exception here. So I got the manual, I got the cartridge, of course. So it's a semi-complete box experience, so no digging into the box itself. I was trying to find alternatives, like, is it cheaper to get like the Pokemon Yellow complete in box with the Game Boy Color? No, way more expensive. So we're gonna go through the manual, which is a real trip down memory lane with some of the Ken Sugimori art that you're gonna see, as well as just so many Oaks memos in there. It's really great stuff. So I hope you enjoyed nonetheless. Let's go through a complete box experience and then talk about the base game afterwards. Starting small here, we have the Pokemon Special Pikachu Edition. This cartridge just fills me with nostalgia. I miss when games just fit on something the size of this and you'd spend so much time with them. But let's move on to more important things. One of the best manuals you can own here, Pokemon Trainer's Guide. And the reason this resonates so strongly, I grew up with Gen 1 like many of you out there, so the Ken Sugimori art style is very prevalent in this entire manual, as you'd come to expect. This kind of faded, thin line art style. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's full of nostalgia. They give you a brief story breakdown to open things up here. I thought it was kind of funny because they talk about at the top here how growing up in Pallet Town, you spend a lot of time playing with your next door neighbor, but then he becomes a bully and no longer wants to play with you. So, Gary basically goes through puberty. He gets all moody. And it turns out it's a bit of a plot twist here because when you go to the lab and you find your former friend there too, you're amazed to find that he's Professor Oak's grandson. So you spent so much time with him and had no idea who his grandfather was. How'd you live in such a small town like Pallet Town and not know that, Red? Anyway, we got the world map here connected by all the various routes. Again, like I mentioned, the Sugimori art is just all over this thing, as you'd expect. They break down the world of Pokemon, what you're going to do here, what are Pokemon, completing your Pokedex is the main goal, defeating the 8 leaders for all the gyms. You have a lot of Fat Pikachu art here. We love Fat Pikachu, absolutely beautiful stuff here. They break down the game controls, and after going through some of the brief menu stuff and stat breakdowns, one thing I found that was really interesting is also, we'll see deeper in the manual, you can print out your Pokedex here using the Game Boy printer, which I thought was also really cool. I did not know about that. But once they break down some of the simple options here, it says, let's begin, and they give you a pretty brief walkthrough of the early parts of the game. So they tell you where to go. I didn't remember seeing this as a kid, really, ever, quite frankly. You even see Red using the terminal up here. I thought this was a really cool illustration. But yeah, they walk you through Viridian City, where you got to go, to the mart, and then back. And they have little memos from Professor Oak down here at the bottom, like the shopkeeper will have a package for me, which I'm expecting back at the lab. So as a kid, you could kind of use this. I don't remember using this at all because I distinctly remember as a kid getting stuck with the big guy laying down on his back in between the two routes, and you had to complete a mission to get him to move, and I didn't know that as a kid, so I got stuck in Pokemon Yellow. Sorry, it was Blue because I had Blue first. I distinctly remember that. Anyway, they even break down the routes that you're taking through Viridian Forest, and I always thought Viridian Forest was huge as a kid, so to see it's literally one little line this way is just so funny. The simplicity is awe-inspiring at times. But we see, familiar Pokemon you'll find in the area. Nidoran, you see a little Metapod. That's awesome. You get to Pewter City. As you can see, again, just very simple town, simple beginnings. And it leads you all the way to your first gym leader in Brock. And then they say afterwards, the adventure goes on, that there's so much more described in the previous pages. You must talk to all the people throughout your quest to become the world's greatest Pokemon trainer. And they tease some stuff. Safari Zone. I remember as a kid finding this place was so exciting. The amount of great Pokemon you can find there is awesome. There's Game Corner. You can go fishing, daycare center, and they have all the Pokemon leaders you're going to look for with a lot of familiar faces if you watched OG Pokemon. They also have some hints here from Professor Oak on how to use the Pokemon box, hidden machines, and what they do, how to arrange your items, change their nicknames, you can stop evolution. So they really walk you through every little mechanic in the game, how you can collect them. And this man here haunted me as a kid. Abra, I'm talking to you. It says here, in each game, there are Pokemon that only appear once. If you do not capture it the first time, you'll never have a chance to capture it again. But this man, I always remember getting stoked as a kid finding him, never captured him. Always got away because I didn't know to put him to sleep. Now I know a little bit better. They have the attack type chart here. There's a lot of strategy in Pokemon, as I'm sure many of you who played competitively know that. So they have all of that broken down here. The battle screen and what you'd see there, we're all plenty familiar there. The Game Link cable and what that can pull off. Afterwards, we have one of my favorite Pokemon on the back pages for the Coliseum. I love Cubone. It's because the lore around Cubone is just extremely tragic. But here you see that they're breaking down Coliseum. And then here on this page, they're breaking down Coliseum too. So yeah, this may look familiar. All these cups are actually in the Coliseum game. They just decided to make all of this in 3D. And that was something else that I picked up that was new to me when reading through this manual. The printing of the Pokedex data. They tell you how to print it out. And so you can actually use the Pokemon Game Boy printer. So I just love how much there is to this game. I mean, Nintendo was always really gimmicky like this. And these are just special items and what they do with a Pokemon list on the back. Yeah, there we go. Sandshrew is another classic I absolutely love. Just some of these designs and their color usage is brilliant. That's why I think Pokemon resonates so much. Poliwag, love the Poliwag family. Machop, I mean, just, yeah, jeez. The nostalgia, it's flowing right through me. And this is just only part of the list. Obviously, you've seen a lot more in the gameplay. Eevee in the back here, Professor Oak to end it all. And then we have a little player's guide here. Got to catch them all with the iconic Charizard art. And that's it for the manual. So I appreciate you bearing with me. I know it was a long one, but just so much nostalgia for me and many of you packed in there. I really wanted to take my time going through it. So that is at least half a complete in-box experience for Pokemon Yellow, or yes, the Special Pikachu Edition. To wrap things up, we have Mike Poe as the final write-in, who says, "This was my first turn-based RPG, and I imagine it was the first for many 90s kids. Compared to other RPGs from the 90s, how do you think this one compares? Clearly, the monster catching mechanic went on to set the world on fire, but I think these games have even more going for them. I think the gym leaders, Elite Four, and Team Rocket were pretty interesting characters for portable 90s games. I also think the music and the vibes of the cities were exceptional for a Game Boy game, Lavender Town being the prime example." So what's special about Pokemon Yellow, or the Special Pikachu Edition as they call it, is that you would actually have connections to the anime in this game. When you played Pokemon Blue and Pokemon Red, they had their own storyline. Like, you didn't have Pikachu automatically. However, in Pokemon Yellow, you can start off with Pikachu, and then you can eventually catch Charmander and Bulbasaur and Squirtle and have all of the starter Pokemon in one single party, which is like the goal in your head right from the get-go. Like, I don't have to pick anymore. I can get all of these and I don't have to trade with anyone or anything. Excellent. So that was one of the real driving points for Pokemon Yellow. The other thing was having Jesse and James there in a meaningful way. Like, they'll ambush you in one of the first caves you're in. You'll actually interact with them in a fight. Like, they're there throughout the whole story. So there's little story changes that bring it more in line with the anime, which is extremely popular at the time. So to have a game kind of connected to that reworks little things there. It's what Pokemon's best known for, right? Releasing 2 versions and then a definitive version, right? So yes, I agree. I think it does do more than just the monster catching. But again, you got to accept, like, this is Pokemon at its bare bones. For me, I've never been a 100% completionist Pokédex kind of guy. The closest I ever really got to that feeling was with Pokemon Legends Arceus, and it's funny because that's like one of the tallest tasks you'd take on with the amount of ways you have to catch Pokemon, but it's because it was a whole game about monster catching. There was no random encounters, which, again, I always say random encounters work, and they work fine when the game's built around it. I think a game like Legends Arceus really excels because it's just completely about catching. You don't have to worry about going in and out of load screens or anything like that. Whereas something like Pokemon Yellow, I think one thing that's aged kind of poorly is the random encounter spawn rate. So sometimes you'll get into a fight, you'll run away, whatever. And then 2 steps later, you get into another fight. that kind of spawn rate is what makes random encounters bad for a lot of people, because you don't get that reprieve of, I've ran away because I want to excel what I'm trying to do right now, so give me at least like 5 to 10 seconds of no encounters. That doesn't really happen here. Like, you'll run away from a fight, 2 steps, another fight, run away, another step, another fight. And this can get a little frustrating if you're just trying to get to, for example, I got knocked out by Jesse and James because my Pokemon were underleveled the first fight I went with them, and I had to run back into the cave. I'm getting random encountered. Sometimes you can't run away. Zubats wrecking my Oddish, how dare they? That type of stuff is gonna happen, and it's a little frustrating. One thing they add though in Pokemon Yellow Legacy are more TM stores, especially late game TM stores. So a mistake I made in the early game was because I was mashing A through the text, is I was asked if I want to change a move for my Pikachu. It's like, yeah, sure, why not? And I accidentally substituted my Thunder Shock with Double Team. And that was really unfortunate, because then Gym 2 with Misty was a lot more difficult because Oddish had to be the team superstar and try to take out a Starmie by itself. So that took a bit of work. So there are little things like that that you'll make mistakes on. And it's really tough to reverse, and I may as well have played the game on hard mode, which for those who don't know with Yellow Legacy, hard mode is basically no items and you cannot pass the level of the next gym. So for example, Starmie's level 21, I can't go past level 21. That's just the highest I can go. The other thing about Pokemon that's really interesting is, I know it's a familiar tried and true formula: beat up the 8 gym leaders, beat up the Elite Four, beat up the main villain faction of the game, and you're good to go, right? It's like the same tried and true formula. But that structure back then was incredibly valuable. That's why it got copied so often. Like, Pokemon for its time was actually considered pretty complex with all of the enemy weaknesses and balancing you had to do. Like, it is a whole different ball game nowadays, but back then, Pokemon, I know people laugh at it, was considered extremely ambitious. The amount of creatures, the amount of weaknesses they had, the amount of moves they had, the balancing of all the fights, the XP gain balancing, the weakness charts. I mean, you looked at the charts in the Complete in Box experience, like, it's a lot. There was a lot that went into this, and it still does, and it's arguably a more gargantuan effort than ever because of how many Pokemon are packed into every single game. It's just so much to balance out. So yeah, it goes a long way. I will say I miss some quality of life enhancements in this game, like say XP share. I think it's the best thing Pokemon's done, is that everyone gets XP. I don't mind grinding. I just mind that I have to grind each one individually, which inflates your hour clock a little bit. Like, go back and just rinse and repeat some fights over and over. Splitting XP just doesn't work out well in this game. So yeah, even to this day, I think Pokemon Yellow's got a lot going for it. It's definitely a lot of nostalgia talking, a lot of childhood memories. Half this video was me talking about memories with this game, so I think that speaks for itself. But still, if you haven't tried it out, I think it's worth it. I think Pokemon just scratches a particular itch with its charm that really no game can particularly reach. And that's because of, I think, its cult status in society itself. It's just such a phenomenon to this day. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts on Pokemon Yellow in 2024. I hope you enjoyed this one. I certainly love going back down memory lane with it. With that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace out.